creativity of the people of Islam had no peer in the European medieval world, which during the Middle Ages was a frontier society, fragmented, fearful, and rudely fortified against itself. The illumination of manuscripts was a direct result of the Crusades. It was an expression of the priceless jewel contained in the scripture of God's revelation to man, so it was considered highly appropriate to embellish books that contained it. This also allowed for an addition also thought worthy for that of aesthetic pleasure. Monks in monastic libraries willingly kept alive the light of learning and enlightenment, enriching their own lives in the process. One of the most enigmatic flowers that feature often in illuminations is the violet, which is notoriously shy and somewhat humble, as monks themselves were supposed to be. They became symbolic of the Virgin Mary's humility and as such considered a noble flower. Flowing in royal purple, their petals bring scent and loveliness together with medicinal qualities, and when infused were taken to relieve the symptoms of a cold. Herbs depicted in illuminated medieval manuscripts were considered to have medicinal properties, such as rue, which medieval monks believed encouraged chastity. They called it the herb of grace and used it to kill fleas. A shrubby perennial, its leaves are aromatic and the foliage makes for an attractive background for the small, fragrant yellow flowers which appear in late spring or summer. Sage required excellent drainage. A wonderfully exuberant herb with long, oval, grey-green leaves, velvety in texture, sage has a slightly bitter camphor-like taste. The flowers are borne on spikes in spring, and the clary sage is a variety known for its decorative qualities. A 9th century monk from the Benedictine Abbey of St. Gall, which is in modern-day Switzerland, expressed his delight in both gardens and garden work while describing fruiting trees. In his descriptions, he included the Punica granatum, commonly called the pomegranate, the apple with many seeds. Originally from the Mediterranean area, it went through Syria, Afghanistan to northwestern India, becoming part of an Oriental tradition. Charlemagne means Charles the Great, and he was king of the Franks from 768 to his death in 814, aged 71. Today he is regarded as the founding father of both the French and German monarchies, and his premature vision included the formation of a modern Europe. It was during the 8th century that he left a list containing fruit trees, and it mentions bitter oranges and sour cherries, as well as the incredible mandrake, whose parsnip-shaped root has often been thought to resemble the human figure, and during the Middle Ages was used in all sorts of magic rituals. There is a legend surrounding this crazy plant that when its root is dug up, it screams and kills all who hear it. There are some highly colourful descriptions for harvesting it in safety, including one from Josephus, who lived in the 1st century. He gave the following directions. A furrow must be dug around the root until its lower part is exposed. Then a dog is tied to it, after which the person tying the dog must get away, because then the dog, when it endeavours to follow him, easily pulls up the root, but dies suddenly instead of his master. After this, the root can be handled without fear. From the macabre to a delightful description by Strabo, a 9th century monk at Reichenau on Lake Constance, not far from St. Gall in Switzerland, in his poem Hortulus describes cutting melons in summer. When the iron blade strikes to its guts, the melon throws out gushing streams of juice and many seeds. The cheerful guest then divides its spent back into many slices. Strabo also praised the rose as the Queen of Flowers, with its incomparable beauty and heady fragrance. Large rose bushes with white and red flowers were praised for their usefulness for inflamed brains. Throughout Christendom they were scattered in churches to signify the gift of the Holy Spirit. To understand the medieval garden in Europe, it's not enough to know how gardens were laid out or which plants were grown in them. It is grasping the ideas implicit in their conception that is of great significance. The idea of a medieval European pleasure garden was first recorded around 1260 in Albertus Magnus's De Vegetabilis et Plantis, which contained practical advice culled from Pliny the Elder's Historia Naturalis, Book 22, on the importance of herbs that had been written in the 1st century after Christ. This encyclopedic work remained the great repository of knowledge throughout the Middle Ages in Europe, one everyone else would draw upon. Albertus Magnus suggested, "About the lawn may be planted every sweet-smelling herb, such as rue, sage and basil. Flowers as the violet, columbine, lily, the rose, iris and the like. Between these herbs and the turf at the edge of the lawn, set square, let there be a higher bench of turf, flowering and lovely, and somewhere in the middle provide seats, so that men may sit down there to take their repose pleasurably when their senses need refreshment." During the 13th century, a very humble monk, Francis of Assisi, visited the Sultan of Egypt to plead for better treatment for the Christian prisoners taken during the Crusades. To this day, the Franciscan order is guardian of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem as a direct result of that visit. Francis was the tallest poppy in the Christian ethos to draw attention to the vital importance, centrality, and great value of establishing a relationship with one's environment. This included plants, flowers, grasses, trees, animals, and birds, who he referred to as brothers and sisters. He also drew attention to the fact that man needed to live in harmony with nature, not endeavour to subdue or control it, but to treat it with respect. In his time, gardening was once again being described in aesthetic rather than just useful terms, and trees and flowers were once again being planted for their decorative qualities. Natural dyes were a result of the expansive knowledge of what plant material could provide, and used in all tapestries of the medieval period. The Lady and the Unicorn tapestries were woven in about 1500, and from the perspective of nature depict accurate portrayals of many trees and flowers, including the pomegranate tree, its fruit the symbol of fertility. In medieval art, everything stood for something else. A dog was never just a dog, a lily never just a lily. There was an elaborate symbolic code familiar to all, in which animals and plants represented different moral messages for humans, often based on physical traits or behaviour. The lion is strong, courageous, faithful, while the unicorn with its single horn is loyal and, like Christ, pure and invincible. The flowery mead was a lawn rich in wildflowers and one of the essential components in all our perceptions of a medieval garden. The mead usually contained about 100 flowers, millefleurs, all of which have been identified and were found wild in the French countryside for artisans to copy. They include campion, lords and ladies, violas, sweet rocket, carnations, white lilies, holy thistle, leopard's bane, stock, and lady's mantle. The Mongol people from the steppes of Asia, like the Arabs before them, became a force to be reckoned with during the 13th century. These ancestors of the Mughal emperors of India were invaders with a policy of reducing entire cities to archaeological ruins and the countryside to desert. Genghis Khan, 1162 to 1227, rode out of the east and reached Central Asia in what is now Afghanistan and Iran in 1218, where systematic destruction of wells and irrigation was part of their finely tuned devastation. Yet, hardly more than a century later, their descendants had converted to Islam and began to establish vast royal encampments with open spaces for ritual and ceremony in imitation of their original enemies. For intrepid Oriental rulers on the move, establishing garden camps throughout the kingdom meant that court business could be conducted in an impressive outdoor setting, and its leader would appear larger than life to any other ordinary citizen. The Mongols absorbed and learned about the aristocratic culture of the Persians. By the time of Timur the Lame, he had a hip injury from his many battles, had established his capital at Samarkand in Uzbekistan. There were beginnings of a fourfold garden encampment, one that resembled forms of royal Mughal gardens. Samarkand is one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world. It's a city noted for its central position on the trade route that ran between China and the Mediterranean. Timur the Lame became Tamerlane. Born a Mongol and in 1369, he made Samarkand the capital of his empire. This extended from India to Turkey, and within 35 years he had built a new city and populated it with artisans and craftsmen who came from all the places he had conquered. Tamerlane was a ruler who had confirmed his place in the divine order and signified his power through gardens, because he had control of them and could manipulate or control water in a landscape where power over this essential element was power over life itself. He could hold, move, dispense or withhold it at his pleasure. His was a hydraulic society that had perfected the technology of irrigation, understanding water's naked power over everyone dependent on it. The Spanish ambassador Rui González de Clavijo was one of the first European travellers to write about paradise gardens. King Henry III of Castile and Leon had sent him as an ambassador to the court of Tamerlane at Samarkand in 1404. He must have been entirely captivated following his long and weary journey by the beauty and luxuriousness of Tamerlane's court and the extent of his garden oasis. When Clavijo arrived, he found the 70-year-old emperor seated on cushions on a raised dais in front of a fountain from which the jets of water fell into a basin, while on the surface red apples floated. His long sought-after first audience took place in a great orchard with a palace therein. A paradise garden he recorded detailed descriptions of, as well as that of the trained and painted elephants he saw, and the tent pavilions of jewel and pearl-encrusted silks with tassels and banners that fluttered in the wind. Tamerlane and his son developed at Herat a distinctive style in gardens for the private use of those who held high estate. The central kiosk, the pool and the garden were all integrated, and the formal garden was inserted purposely into a wilderness which demonstrated more the contrast between the peaceful pleasures of the sanctuary and the uncontrollable nature. Descended from Genghis Khan through his mother and Tamerlane through his father, Zahir-ud-Din Muhammad Babur, 1483 to 1530, knew all about garden power. He established great political centres at Delhi, Agra and Lahore, beginning in 1526. A poet and musician, he used his gardens for three activities: rest, landscape observation and drinking parties. Mughal gardens were built primarily as settings for princely tombs, for pleasure or for entertainment. In the Vale of Kashmir there was plenty of water, the ground was fertile and the Himalayas protected the valley from the monsoon. Kashmir was a garden of eternal spring, where gardeners were challenged to continually find new ways to exploit the aesthetic possibilities of the abundance of water. Of all the Mughal gardens that contain the tomb of a loved one, none is more enigmatic or seductive than the Taj Mahal at Agra. Its stunning architecture is tied up in a romantic myth, which has in part obscured the historical significance of the gardens in which it was originally set. The large garden contains 4 reflecting pools fed by the river Jamuna behind it, meeting at the centre. Each section is further subdivided into 4 sections and then each into yet another 4. Built by Muslim Emperor Shah Jahan, who died in 1666 in the memory of his dear wife, some would say it is an expression of a dream. One thing that all cultures do share is dreams. And when the Crusaders defeated returned from the exotic lands of the East to Europe and England, out of the midst of the chaos and destruction they had brought, they brought back with them positive influences, such as enlightened thought in theology and spirituality, a great deal of plant material, new methods of horticulture that enliven and enlarge that known in Europe until that point in time. There was a great deal of influence also on architecture. The introduction of the brick and decorative brickwork came into England via France, as well as the influence on the design of churches and castles. The most famous literary celebration of gardens from the Middle Ages was the Romaunt de la Rose, published in 1277. In it, the lover, possibly a knight, goes in search of the desirable symbolic rose. In it, the lover wanders into an outer garden where he is confronted by a high wall with a door in it. He cannot enter until the door is opened by Lady Idleness. When he enters the inner garden where the trees are set at exactly equal distances and have their tops so interwoven that the sun's rays cannot penetrate, he finds himself in a place belonging to the spirit to make him happy and full of joy. By the 14th century, plant collecting and their identification on a more scientific basis was happening. A Parisian householder writing a treatise for his young wife with instructions on how to run the house and garden described the growing, harvesting and preserving of fruit, nuts, flowers and herbs. He also detailed the method of preserving cuttings of rosemary for transporting from Mediterranean shores, wrapped in waxed cloth, sewn up, smeared with honey and powdered with wheaten flour. There are many reasons for making gardens, including worldly pleasure, political power, ambition, exhaustion, a place to indulge in detailed observation and to engage our emotions on many levels. It is suggested civilization without its garden traditions may be judged impoverished, flawed and incomplete, and for those with a strong and committed religious belief, spending time in a garden of eternity is a desired goal, while for others it's about finding a place of solace from the stresses and strains of contemporary life. The Italian poet Boccaccio, in his literary work The Decameron, printed first in 1348, painted a vivid picture of 14th century life. On the summit of the hill was a palace with galleries, halls and chambers, disposed around a fair and spacious court, each very fair in itself, and the goodlier to see for the gladsome pictures with which it was adorned, the whole set amidst meads and gardens, laid out with marvellous art. In the midst of the garden a lawn of very fine grass, so green it seemed nearly black, coloured with perhaps 1,000 kind of flowers, shut in with very green citrus and orange trees bearing, at the same time, both ripe fruit and young fruit, and flowers so that they please the sense of smell, as well as charmed the eyes with shade. He said, "The sight of this garden, its form and contrivance, with the fountain and the spring proceeding from it, pleased the gentles and ladies so much that they spared not to say, if there was a paradise on earth, it could be in no other form, nor was it possible to add anything to it."